The diplomatic vessel Horizon's Gate drifted through the darkness of space like a massive metal flower. Its petals were docking, arms extended in welcome, waiting for the most important visitor humanity had ever received. Inside the main corridor, Jake Morrison wiped his hands on an old cloth and checked the environmental controls for the third time that hour. Everything had to be perfect. The Xanthari were coming, and everyone said this meeting would either bring peace or push two civilizations toward war. Jake was just a maintenance engineer. He fixed broken pipes, repaired door seals, and made sure the air kept flowing through the ventilation systems. Nobody important ever noticed him, and that was fine. He preferred working with his hands to working with people anyway. But today, even Jake felt nervous. The Xanthari Empire had avoided humans for 30 years, ever since the first disastrous contact that left both sides angry and confused. Now their queen was coming here, to this ship, to talk about ending the Cold War. Ambassador Patricia Grant stood near the main airlock with her diplomatic team. She wore formal clothes that looked uncomfortable, and her face showed the kind of tired that came from too many sleepless nights. Jake had seen her practicing her welcome speech in the observation deck at 3 a.m. once, talking to a reflection in the window. The weight of two civilizations rested on her shoulders. The comm system crackled. A voice announced that the Xanthari royal ship had matched velocity and was beginning docking procedures. Jake moved back against the wall, staying out of the way. He was only here because regulations required engineering staff at all docking events, in case something went wrong mechanically. His tool belt felt heavy against his hip. Through the airlock window, Jake caught his first glimpse of the Xanthari vessel. It looked like a crystal grown into the shape of a ship, all sharp angles and smooth curves that seemed impossible to create. Huh, beautiful, he thought. Absolutely beautiful. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk that vibrated through the floor. The airlock began its cycling process. Jake watched the pressure gauges carefully. Everything seemed normal. The green light appeared, and the door started to open. Ambassador Grant stepped forward with her practiced smile. The first Xanthari through the door was a warrior. That much was obvious. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in what looked like living crystal plates that shifted colors in the light. His face was angular and proud, with eyes that glowed a soft blue. This had to be Commander Lorik, the military advisor everyone had been briefed about. He scanned the reception area with obvious suspicion, his hand resting on a weapon at his side. Then Queen Vitara entered, and Jake forgot to breathe. She was magnificent. Taller than her commander, she moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large. Her crystalline body sparkled with inner light, patterns shifting across her surface like Aurora Borealis. But what caught Jake's attention was her armor. It covered her chest, shoulders, and back in plates of worked metal and crystal that must have taken master craftsmen years to create. The designs were intricate, telling stories in a language Jake couldn't read but somehow understood. This was ancient work, the kind that connected past to present. Ambassador Grant began her welcome speech. Jake barely heard the words. He was watching the way Queen Vetara's armor caught the light, noticing the craftsmanship in every joint and connection. Whoever made this understood materials at a deep level, knew how to work with crystal and metal as if they were clay. The formal greetings continued. Queen Vetara's voice came through a translator device, sounding musical even through the electronic filter. She spoke about hopes for peace and understanding between their peoples. Jake noticed Commander Lorik still hadn't relaxed his guard. The warrior's eyes kept moving, evaluating every detail. Then it happened. As Queen Vetara moved forward to accept a ceremonial gesture from Ambassador Grant, her armor caught on a piece of the airlock mechanism that hadn't fully retracted. There was a horrible scraping sound, and a section of the breastplate cracked. Not badly, but enough. A piece about the size of Jake's palm now had a visible fracture running through it, and a small chunk of decorative crystal had broken free, falling to the floor with a tiny musical note. The silence that followed was absolute. Commander Lorik's hand went to his weapon. The other Xanthari in the delegation made sounds like wind through broken glass. Queen Vetara stood frozen, one hand moving slowly to touch the damaged section. Ambassador Grant's face went pale. She began apologizing immediately, words tumbling over each other. Jake could see her diplomatic career ending in real time. But his attention was on Queen Vitara's face. The queen wasn't angry. She looked hurt, genuinely pained, as if the damage to the armor was damage to herself. This armor has been worn by 43 generations of my family, Queen Vetara said quietly through her translator. It has survived wars, ceremonies, and the passage of 800 years. It has never been broken. Never. Commander Lorik stepped forward. This is an omen. A bad beginning to negotiations that should not continue. Please, Ambassador Grant said, her voice desperate. We have repair facilities. Our best technicians can fix this. We can make it right. No human will touch the armor of ancestors, Commander Lorik said firmly. It will be repaired by Xanthari hands, or not at all. The Xanthari delegation moved into a tight group, speaking rapidly in their own language. Jake could hear the anger and concern in their voices even without understanding the words. He picked up the broken crystal fragment from the floor carefully, examining it. The fracture pattern showed the stress points. The break was clean, which was good. It could be repaired if someone had the right tools and understood the material's properties, the argument continued. The Xanthari engineers, it turned out, hadn't brought proper repair equipment for something like this. They hadn't expected to need it. Commander Lorik insisted they would wait for tools to be brought from their ship, however long that took. Ambassador Grant tried to convince them to at least move to the diplomatic quarters where they could be comfortable, but Queen Vitara refused. She would not proceed with any negotiations while her armor remained broken. Jake stood against the wall, still holding the small crystal fragment, and watched the peace summit begin to fall apart before it even started. The Queen looked tired now, the inner light that made her so beautiful seeming dimmed. She touched the crack in her armor again, a gesture of sadness. In that moment, Jake made a decision. He couldn't fix politics or bridge cultural gaps, but broken things? Those he understood. He slipped away while everyone was still arguing, the crystal fragment safely in his pocket. He had work to do. The diplomatic quarters fell silent after midnight. Jake Morrison moved through the corridors like a shadow, his soft shoes making no sound on the metal floors. He had spent the last 6 hours in his workshop, and his eyes burned from staring through magnification lenses, but he wasn't tired. His mind raced with calculations and possibilities. In his hand, he carried a small case containing tools he had fabricated himself. Tiny precision instruments, some no thicker than a human hair. Next to them sat a small container of bonding compound he had mixed using 3 different materials from the ship's stores. The formula had taken him 17 attempts to get right, testing each version on sample crystals until he found one that matched the structural properties of Xanthari work. The diplomatic section was supposed to be restricted, but Jake had helped install most of the security systems. He knew which cameras covered which angles and where the blind spots were. More importantly, he knew the maintenance access passages that ran behind the fancy guest quarters. Every ship had them. Passengers saw elegant rooms and polished corridors. Engineers saw the guts behind the walls, the real paths that kept everything running. He reached the panel he needed and carefully removed the screws. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, lit only by the small light attached to his headband. Jake squeezed through, counting ventilation grates until he found the right one. Through the slats, he could see the antechamber where Queen Vetara's armor rested on a ceremonial stand. The armor seemed to glow in the dim light, even damaged. Jake had pulled every file he could find about Xanthari metallurgy and crystallography. Their craftsmen worked with materials that formed naturally on their high-pressure homeworld, crystals that grew in lattice patterns unlike anything found on Earth. But Jake had worked on mining colonies where they processed exotic minerals. He had seen similar structures before, even if the specific composition was different. He studied the armor through the grate for 10 minutes, memorizing every detail of the damaged section. The crack ran diagonally across the breastplate, and the missing piece had left a gap that disrupted the flow of the design. It was worse than he had thought. The fracture had created stress points that would spread over time if not properly repaired. Jake removed the grate slowly, testing each movement to avoid any sound. His heart hammered in his chest. What he was doing violated at least 6 regulations. If caught, he could be confined to quarters for the rest of the journey, maybe even court-martialed for interfering with diplomatic protocols. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Queen Vetara's face when the armor broke. That kind of pain deserved to be fixed. He lowered himself into the antechamber and approached the armor stand. Up close, it was even more impressive. The metalwork showed techniques Jake had never seen before. Joined so seamless they seemed grown rather than assembled. The intact portions of crystal caught his headlamp light and split it into rainbows across the walls. "Beautiful," Jake whispered, then felt foolish for talking to an empty room. He opened his case and selected the smallest probe, beginning his examination of the crack. The fracture went deeper than visible from the surface, following the natural grain of the crystal structure. Jake made mental notes, his hands steady despite his nervousness. This was what he was good at. This was what made sense to him. The broken fragment from his pocket fit back into place almost perfectly, but almost wasn't good enough. Jake used a molecular scanner, borrowed from the medical bay, to map the exact boundaries. He would need to fill microscopic gaps with the bonding compound, then use a resonance tool to help the crystal lattice reform across the repair. Hours passed. Jake worked with the concentration of a surgeon, his whole world narrowing to the damaged section of armor. He cleaned the fracture surfaces with a solvent that wouldn't damage the base material. He applied the bonding compound in layers so thin they were nearly invisible, waiting between each application for the chemical reaction to stabilize. The compound changed color slightly as it cured, shifting from clear to a faint blue that matched the crystal's natural tint. The delicate part came when he had to set the broken fragment back in place. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he positioned it, using 3 different magnification levels to check the alignment. A hair's width off in any direction, and the repair would be obvious, the flow of the design disrupted. He held his breath and pressed gently, feeling the bonding compound grip. He was so focused on his work that he didn't hear the door open behind him, didn't notice the presence in the room until a voice spoke in accented but clear English. "What are you doing, human?" Jake spun around, his heart lurching. Commander Lorik stood in the doorway, still wearing his formal armor. The Xanthari warrior's eyes glowed brighter now, either from anger or surprise. His hand rested on his weapon, but he hadn't drawn it. "I'm fixing the armor," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. "The crack will spread if it's not repaired properly. The stress pattern shows that clearly." Commander Lorik moved closer, his crystalline form reflecting Jake's headlamp and strange patterns on the walls. He looked at the armor, then at Jake's tools, then back at the armor. His expression was unreadable. "You were told no human would touch the armor of ancestors," Lorik said. "I know. I'm sorry. But I couldn't just let it stay broken." Jake turned back to the armor. If he was going to get in trouble anyway, he might as well finish the job. "I need another 20 minutes. The bonding compound has to fully cure before I can do the resonance treatment." He expected Lorik to stop him, to call for guards or drag him away. Instead, the commander moved to stand beside him, looking at the repair. The silence stretched between them. "How did you learn to work with crystal matrices?" Lorik asked finally. "Mining colonies," Jake said, selecting his resonance tool from the case. "We processed a lot of exotic minerals, had to understand their structure to extract them without causing fractures. I read everything I could find about Xanthari materials after the armor broke. Your craftsmen work at a level we can't match, but the underlying principles are similar." Lorik made a sound that might have been surprise. Jake activated the resonance tool, a device that sent carefully calibrated vibrations through crystalline structures. He held it against the repair, watching through his magnification lens as the crystal lattice began to knit together across the bonding line. The compound acted as a bridge, allowing the natural structure to reform. "You understand the singing of stone," Lorik said quietly. "This is rare among your kind." "I just understand that everything has its own nature," Jake replied, adjusting the resonance frequency slightly. "You can't force materials to be something they're not. You have to work with what they want to be." Another long silence. Jake completed the resonance treatment and began the final step, polishing the repair site with a compound so fine it was almost like dust. The crack was still faintly visible if you knew where to look, but the structural integrity was restored. More importantly, the flow of the design was preserved. The repair followed the original craftsman's intent. "You have brought no honor to yourself by doing this in secret," Commander Lorik said. Jake nodded, packing his tools away. "I know. But the armor needed to be fixed. That mattered more than following rules." Lorik studied him for a long moment. Then the warrior did something unexpected. He reached out and touched the repaired section, his fingers tracing the barely visible line. His eyes closed, and he seemed to be feeling something beyond what human senses could detect. "The Queen will ask who has done this," Lorik said finally. "When morning comes and she sees her armor whole again, she will demand to know." "What will you say?" "The truth," Jake said simply. "I'll tell her it was me." Commander Lorik's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. He nodded once and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at Jake. "The truth has consequences, engineer. Be prepared to face them." Then he was gone, leaving Jake alone with the repaired armor and the weight of what morning would bring. The morning assembly gathered in the main diplomatic hall at exactly 800 hours. Jake Morrison stood near the back wall with the other junior crew members trying to look invisible. He had not slept. After finishing the repair and returning to his quarters through the maintenance passages, he had sat on his bunk staring at his hands, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Ambassador Patricia Grant stood at the front with her diplomatic team, looking even more tired than yesterday. The Xanthari delegation entered from the opposite door. Commander Lorik leading the way. Queen Vitara came last, walking with the same grace as before, but Jake could see the tension in her movements. She still wore the damaged armor, as protocol demanded she wear it for all formal gatherings. Except it was no longer damaged. The Queen stopped mid-step. Her hand went to her breastplate, fingers tracing the place where the crack had been. The other Xanthari noticed immediately, gathering around her with sounds of confusion and wonder. Commander Lorik stood apart, his glowing eyes scanning the assembled humans until they found Jake. The warrior's expression revealed nothing. Queen Vetara touched the repair again and again, her fingers moving over the surface with the delicacy of someone reading Braille. She turned to her own engineers, speaking rapidly in the Xanthari language. Jake didn't need a translator to understand the question. The engineers gestured helplessly, clearly denying any involvement. The Queen's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Her translator device rendered her words into English with crystal clarity. "Who has done this? Who has touched the armor of ancestors?" The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush. Ambassador Grant stepped forward, her face showing genuine confusion. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. Has something happened to the armor?" "It has been repaired," Queen Vetara said. She moved toward the human delegation, each step deliberate and powerful. "In the night, while we rested, someone entered the chamber where my armor stood. Someone with great skill has mended the break. I demand to know who has dared to touch what is sacred to my people." The human diplomatic team looked at each other with blank faces. Nobody knew. Jake felt his stomach twist. He should step forward now, before this went any further. But his feet seemed rooted to the floor. Around him, other crew members whispered nervously. Queen Vetara's engineers spoke to her in urgent tones. Through the translator, Jake heard fragments. "Impossible quality. Master-level work. Crystal lattice perfectly aligned." They sounded amazed and offended at the same time. "Perhaps your own people did this without informing you?" Ambassador Grant suggested carefully. "A gesture of goodwill during the night?" "My engineers swear by the ancient stones they did not," Queen Vetara replied. "And I believe them. They would not lie about such a thing. This was human work. I can feel it in the repair. The technique is different, foreign, yet the respect for the material is absolute." Commander Lorik had not moved. His eyes remained fixed on Jake. The warrior could end this right now, could point and accuse. But he stayed silent, watching. Waiting. Jake's heart pounded. This was it. The moment where he either stepped forward or became a coward. He thought about his father, who had taught him to fix things on a frozen colony world. His father always said that if you did something, you owned it. Good or bad, you stood up and claimed your work. Jake pushed away from the wall. His movement caught attention, heads turning. He walked forward through the crowd, his tool belt clinking softly with each step. People moved aside, creating a path. He could feel every eye on him, human and Xanthari both. "I did it, Your Majesty," Jake said. His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. "I repaired your armor." The Queen turned to face him fully. Up close, she was even more imposing, towering over him by more than 2 feet. Her eyes, glowing with inner light, studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he met her gaze and held it.
"You," she said slowly, "you are a warrior?"
"A scientist? What is your rank in the human hierarchy?" "I'm a maintenance engineer, Your Majesty. I fix things. Doors, pipes, environmental systems, whatever breaks on the ship." Jake gestured to his work clothes, stained and worn compared to the formal uniforms around him. "I don't have a rank. Not really." A ripple of reaction went through the Xanthari delegation. Jake heard words he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Shock. Disbelief. Some kind of insult had been perceived. One of the Xanthari engineers stepped forward, speaking rapidly. The translator struggled to keep up. "A common laborer has touched the Queen's armor? This is outrageous. This is desecration. The armor has been sullied by unworthy hands." Queen Vetara raised one hand, silencing her engineer. She looked down at Jake, her expression unreadable. "What training do you have?" What master taught you the ways of crystal work?" "No master, Your Majesty. My father taught me basic repair when I was a kid. The rest I learned by doing. I worked mining colonies for 12 years, processing minerals and crystals. You learn to understand materials when your life depends on not breaking them the wrong way. And you thought yourself qualified to repair 800 years of craftsmanship?" The Queen's voice was soft, but Jake heard danger in it. "No, Your Majesty." Jake swallowed hard. "I didn't think I was qualified." But I saw the stress pattern in the fracture. It would have spread. In a few weeks, maybe a month, you would have lost the whole breastplate. I couldn't let that happen. The work was too beautiful to let it die from neglect. Commander Lorik finally moved, coming to stand beside his queen. He speaks truth about the stress pattern. I observed his work. He used human techniques, but he understood the nature of the material. The repair is sound. Queen Vetara's eyes widened slightly. She looked at her military advisor with something like surprise. You watched and did not stop him? I watched to ensure he meant no harm, Lorik replied. He showed reverence, not disrespect. His hands moved like one who loves the craft. I chose to wait and see. The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she reached up and began removing a piece of her armor, a shoulder plate that came free with practiced ease. She held it out to Jake. Show me. Explain what you see. Jake took the armor piece carefully, surprised by its weight and warmth. He turned it in his hands, examining the surface under the hall's lights. Up close, he could see details invisible from a distance. Microscopic tooling marks that showed where the original craftsman had worked. Tiny variations in the crystal structure that created patterns of light. This section here, Jake pointed to a curve near the edge. A crystal grain runs diagonally. The craftsman who made this understood the diagonal grain gives more flexibility without losing strength. And these marks, they're not random, they're deliberate. They help distribute impact force across the whole plate instead of concentrating it at one point. He traced another line with his finger. And this joining technique, where the crystal meets the metal backing. It's genius. The metal has tiny perforations that let the crystal grow through it, creating a bond that's stronger than either material alone. We can't do this. Human technology isn't precise enough yet, but the principle is sound. It's engineering at the highest level. Queen Vetara listened to every word, her expression shifting from stern to something else. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You see the armor as a living work, not merely as an object to be fixed. Everything well-made is alive in its own way, Jake said, handing the shoulder plate back carefully. The person who created this put part of themselves into it. Their knowledge, their skill, their vision of what it should be, that doesn't die just because centuries pass. It stays in the work, waiting for someone who cares enough to see it. The queen replaced her shoulder armor slowly, her movements thoughtful. Around them, both delegations watched in absolute silence. Ambassador Grant looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't dare interrupt. In my culture, Queen Vetara said finally, those who work with their hands at the highest level are called kashtari. The word means those who give form to spirit. It is one of our most honored titles. Kashtari are teachers, advisors, keepers of tradition. They stand equal to warriors and scientists in our society. She paused, studying Jake with those glowing eyes. You say you are just a maintenance engineer, just a fixer of broken things. But you have hands of a Kashtari. You have eyes that see beyond the surface to the truth beneath. This is a rare gift even among my own people. Jake didn't know what to say. He stood there feeling overwhelmed and small and suddenly visible in a way he had never wanted to be. However, the queen continued, her voice hardening, you broke our laws. You entered a sacred space without permission. You touched what you were forbidden to touch. These actions cannot be ignored, regardless of outcome or intent. Commander Lorik's hand moved toward his weapon. A pair in our first kind of Ambassador Grant found her voice. Your Majesty, please. He meant no disrespect. He was trying to help. Queen Vetara raised her hand again, commanding silence. She looked at Jake, and in her eyes he saw something he didn't expect. Not anger, but curiosity. Deep, genuine curiosity. Come to my quarters in 1 hour, Engineer Jake Morrison. Bring your tools and your knowledge. If you truly see what I believe you see, then we have much to discuss. But know this, I will test you. I will challenge what you claim to understand. And if you fail, there will be consequences. She turned and walked from the hall, her repaired armor catching the light. Commander Lorik followed, but not before giving Jake a slight nod. The rest of the Xanthari delegation filed out behind them, leaving confused humans in their wake. Jake stood alone in the center of the room, aware of dozens of stares. Ambassador Grant approached him, her expression caught between relief and concern. What just happened? She asked quietly. I think, Jake said slowly, I just got invited to the scariest job interview of my life. Jake Morrison stood outside Queen Vetara's quarters with his tool case in one hand and his courage in the other. He had changed into his cleanest work clothes, which still looked shabby compared to the polished diplomatic corridor around him. His hands were scrubbed raw, every trace of grease and oil removed. It felt strange. His hands were usually marked by his work. The door opened before he could knock. Commander Lorik stood there, his crystalline form blocking most of the entrance. You came. Good. The Queen does not appreciate cowardice. I'm here, Jake said, then added, though I'm definitely scared. Lorik's expression might have been a smile. Hard to tell with Xanthari faces. Fear with honesty is wisdom. Fear with lies is weakness. Enter. The quarters beyond were larger than Jake expected, but not decorated in the fancy way he thought royalty would demand. Instead, the room looked like a workshop. Tables covered with tools he didn't recognize, pieces of armor and crystal in various states of repair, diagrams on the walls showing designs and patterns. This was a working space, not a showroom. Queen Vitara stood at the far table, her back to him. She had removed most of her ceremonial armor and wore only a simple chest piece. Without the full regalia, she looked different, still impressive, still powerful, but more approachable somehow. Like a person instead of a symbol. You keep your word, Engineer Morrison, she said without turning. That is good. Now come here and tell me what you see. Jake approached the table. Spread across it were pieces of Xanthari armor, some ancient and some newer. The Queen pointed to one section, a gauntlet that showed obvious damage. This piece is 300 years old. It was worn by my great ancestor during the War of the Crystal Moons. The joint here is weakened over time. My engineers say it cannot be repaired without replacing the entire assembly. What do you say? Jake set down his case and examined the gauntlet carefully. He picked it up, feeling its weight distribution. The joint was indeed weak, the metal fatigued from centuries of stress. But as he looked closer, he saw the real problem. The joint isn't the issue, Your Majesty. The supporting structure behind it has compressed. See here? The backing plate has lost its curve. That throws all the stress onto the joint itself. He pulled out a small measuring tool and checked the angles. If you reshape the backing plate to its original curve, the joint will stabilize. The metal might be fatigued, but it still has strength if the forces are distributed properly. Queen Vetara moved closer, watching over his shoulder. Show me. Jake's hands moved before his brain caught up. He selected tools from his case and began working on the backing plate, using careful pressure to gradually restore its shape. He heated the metal with a precision torch, working in small sections to avoid creating new stress points. The Queen watched every movement, occasionally asking questions about his technique.
An hour passed, then 2.
Jake fell into the rhythm of work, the nervousness fading as his hands found their purpose. He strengthened the backing plate, realigned the joint, and tested the movement. The gauntlet flexed smoothly, the weakness gone. Acceptable, Queen Vetara said, and Jake heard approval in her voice. Now this one. She presented another piece, then another. Each had a different problem, a different challenge. Jake worked through them methodically, explaining his reasoning for each repair. Sometimes the Queen agreed with his approach. Sometimes she showed him Xanthari techniques he had never seen, methods that made his human tools look crude by comparison. Your people work with hammer and force, she said at one point, demonstrating a tool that used resonance instead of pressure. We work with song and patience. The crystal responds to vibration, to harmony. You must ask it to change, not demand. Jake tried her tool, fumbling at first, but gradually understanding the principle. It was like tuning an instrument, finding the right frequency to make the material respond. This is incredible, he said quietly. We have nothing like this. Because you are young as a species, Queen Vetar replied. You have had technology for mere centuries. We have refined our crafts for thousands of years, but youth is not weakness. You see problems from angles we have forgotten to look. She picked up the gauntlet he had repaired earlier. My engineers wanted to replace the assembly because that is how we've always done it. Complete replacement, perfect matching to original specifications. You saw a simpler answer. Restore what exists rather than discard and rebuild. Sometimes the old ways make us blind to obvious solutions. Commander Lorik entered the room carrying a tray with strange fruits and a pitcher of liquid that glowed faintly blue. You have been working for 4 hours. Even Kashtari must rest and eat. Jake suddenly realized he was exhausted. His back ached from bending over the table, and his stomach growled at the sight of food. Thank you, Commander. They sat together, an odd trio around the work table. The fruit tasted sweet and slightly metallic, and the glowing liquid was cool and refreshing. Queen Vetara asked Jake about his life, his training, his experiences on the mining colonies. He told her about growing up in prefab shelters on frozen worlds, about learning to fix environmental suits because a mistake meant death in the cold, about his father who could repair anything with just basic tools and patience. My father used to say that every broken thing wants to be whole again, Jake said. You just have to listen to what it's telling you. I thought he was being poetic, but the more I worked, the more I understood. Materials have their own nature. Crystal grows in certain patterns. Metal fatigues in predictable ways. If you pay attention, the object tells you how to fix it. Queen Vetara set down her cup slowly. Your father was Keshtari, whether your people have a word for it or not. He understood the truth beneath the surface. She stood and walked to a cabinet, removing something wrapped in soft cloth. When she unwrapped it, Jake saw a breastplate similar to her ceremonial armor, but clearly much older. The metal was darker, the crystal clouded. Cracks ran through multiple sections. This was worn by the first of my line to unite the Xanthari clans, the queen said softly. It is over 2,000 years old. For centuries it has been displayed but never worn, because the damage is too severe. Every engineer who has examined it says the same thing. It is beautiful, but broken beyond repair. The cracks go too deep. The crystal is aged beyond recovery. She placed the ancient armor on the table in front of Jake. I want you to examine this. Not to repair it, not yet. Just to look and tell me what you truly see. No flattery, no diplomatic words. The honest assessment of a craftsman. Jake approached the armor as if it were a holy relic, which in a way it was. He studied it from every angle, using his tools to examine the fracture patterns. The damage was extensive, that was undeniable. But as he looked closer, he saw something else. The cracks followed the natural grain of the crystal in most places. The metal, though dark with age, showed no signs of rust or decay. The structure was damaged, yes, but not dead. I think, Jake said carefully, that everyone has been looking at this as one piece that needs complete restoration. But it's not one piece. It's a system of connected parts. The cracks have actually created natural breakpoints. If you treat each section separately, stabilize the fragments individually, then reconnect them with proper bridging techniques, you could restore functional integrity. He pointed to specific areas. Here, the crystal could be reinforced from behind without altering the visible surface. Here, the metal could be supported with an inner framework. It would never be as strong as new, but it could be worn again. It could live again instead of just existing as a museum piece. Queen Vetara was silent for a long time. She touched the ancient armor with reverence, her fingers tracing the cracks Jake had indicated. My engineers see only what is broken. You see what could be healed. This is the difference between technical skill and true understanding. She looked at Jake with an intensity that made him catch his breath. I am going to ask something unprecedented. I want you to work on this restoration. Not alone, you do not have the knowledge yet, but alongside my master craftsmen. Bring your human perspective, your different techniques. Let them teach you our ways, and you teach them yours. Together, you might achieve what neither could alone. Jake felt the weight of what she was offering. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but your people already resent that I touched your ceremonial armor. If I work on something this sacred, this important to your history, it could cause serious problems. It will cause problems, Commander Lorik said from his seat. There will be those who call it sacrilege, who say human hands defile our most precious artifacts. Yes, Queen Vetara agreed. There will be opposition, but there will also be those who see the wisdom in combining our knowledge, who understand that preservation of the past sometimes requires new approaches. She gestured to the room around them, the mixed tools and techniques. I did not become queen by following only tradition. I lead my people forward while honoring what came before. She extended her hand toward Jake, palm up in what he guessed was a Xanthari gesture of agreement. Will you accept this challenge, Engineer Morrison? Will you help me prove that cooperation between our species can create something neither could achieve alone? Jake thought about all the reasons to say no. The political complications, the cultural sensitivities, his own limitations. But then he looked at the ancient armor, broken but not defeated, waiting for someone to care enough to try. He placed his hand over the queen's palm, human flesh against crystalline surface. I'll try, Your Majesty. I can't promise success, but I promise I'll give it everything I have. Queen Vetara's inner light seemed to glow brighter. That is all any Keshtari can offer. Dedication, skill, and respect for the work. The rest we discover together. She turned to Commander Lorik. Inform Ambassador Grant that the peace negotiations will proceed. And arrange for a joint workshop space. Human and Xanthari craftsmen will work together starting tomorrow. It is time we learned from each other. As Jake left the royal quarters hours later, his tool case heavy with borrowed Xanthari instruments and his mind full of new possibilities, he realized something profound had shifted. He had entered as a nervous engineer who had broken the rules. He was leaving as a bridge between two civilizations, built not through diplomacy or politics, but through the simple act of caring about broken things. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison first walked into Queen Vitara's workshop. 3 weeks that felt like 3 years of learning compressed into days and nights of constant work. The joint workshop space hummed with activity, a strange mixing of human and Xanthari techniques that produced sounds like music from broken instruments trying to find harmony together. Jake stood at his workbench next to Kelvin, a Xanthari master craftsman who had initially refused to work with any human. That first day, Kelvin had turned his back and worked in silence, making his contempt obvious. But tools speak louder than words, and after Jake had solved a problem with crystal alignment that Kelvin had struggled with for days, the ice began to crack. Now they worked side by side, teaching each other, arguing about methods, and creating repairs neither could have achieved alone. Across the workshop, Kelly Price and Danny Walsh, 2 human engineers Jake had requested, worked with other Xanthari artisans. Kelly's background in molecular chemistry made her invaluable for understanding crystal bonding, while Danny's experience with metallurgy helped bridge the gap between human and Xanthari metalworking traditions. The workshop had become a space where species mattered less than skill and curiosity. The ancient armor of the First Queen sat in the center of the room on a specialized stand, partially disassembled into its component sections. Each piece was being carefully restored using combined techniques. Human precision tools worked alongside Xanthari resonance devices. Chemical bonding compounds were enhanced with crystalline growth formulas. Every day brought new discoveries, new ways of solving old problems. Jake was working on one of the shoulder plates when Queen Vitara entered with Ambassador Grant. The 2 leaders had been spending more time together lately, and Jake had heard that the peace negotiations were progressing well. Apparently, the workshop had become a symbol of what cooperation could achieve, making the diplomats' jobs easier. "How goes the restoration?" Queen Vitara asked, approaching the central stand. Kelvin answered before Jake could, his translator rendering his words with obvious pride. "Better than expected, Your Majesty. The human technique of micro-welding combined with our resonance healing has restored structural integrity to sections we thought lost, and Engineer Morrison has developed a hybrid bonding method that exceeds either of our traditional approaches." Jake felt his face heat up at the praise. "Kelvin is being generous. He's the one who showed me how to read the crystal harmonics." Without that knowledge, the bonding compound wouldn't work nearly as well. "They have been doing this for days," Commander Lorik said, entering behind the Queen. He had become a regular visitor to the workshop, claiming he was there for security but obviously fascinated by the work. Each praising the other, each claiming the other deserves more credit. It is both admirable and exhausting to witness. Queen Vitara examined the restored sections closely, her fingers tracing repairs with the practiced touch of someone who understood craftsmanship. "The work is extraordinary. I can barely see the repair lines, and the structural readings show strength equal to or exceeding the original construction. My ancestors would be honored." She turned to face the assembled workers, human and Xanthari alike. "You have proven something important here. Not just that our species can work together, but that we make each other better by doing so. Your techniques complement each other. Your different perspectives solve problems neither could solve alone." Ambassador Grant smiled, looking more relaxed than Jake had ever seen her. "The workshops have inspired similar collaborations across other fields. We have teams working together on engineering projects, medical research, even artistic endeavors. What started here is spreading, which is why the peace treaty will include provisions for permanent cultural exchange programs," Queen Vitara announced. "Technology sharing, joint research facilities, and most importantly, apprenticeship opportunities. Young Xanthari will learn from human masters, and young humans will study with Xanthari craftsmen." She looked directly at Jake. "And you, Engineer Morrison, will be formally recognized as the first human Kashtari. You will be invited to visit our homeworld to teach and learn at our most prestigious workshops. This is an honor never before given to an outsider." Jake felt the room spinning slightly. "Your Majesty, I don't know what to say. I'm just a guy who fixes things." "You are a bridge," Queen Vitara corrected gently. "You saw past fear and protocol to do what was right. You treated our most sacred artifacts with reverence while bringing fresh perspectives to their care. And you have taught my people that Wisdom can come from unexpected places. Kelvin placed a crystalline hand on Jake's shoulder, a gesture he had learned meant deep respect among the Xanthari. You have earned this honor, friend Jake. Accept it with the same humility you bring to your work. The next 2 weeks were a blur of final preparations. The ancient armor was completed, each section restored and reassembled with techniques that combined the best of both civilizations. The day chosen for its unveiling was also the day of the treaty signing, making it a double ceremony that would mark a new era of cooperation. The main hall was packed with representatives from both species and several other civilizations who had sent observers. Jake stood near the back again, but this time he wore formal clothes that Ambassador Grant had insisted he needed. He felt uncomfortable and kept tugging at the collar, wishing for his regular work clothes. Queen Vitara entered wearing her ceremonial armor, the repaired breastplate gleaming under the lights. But all eyes were on what Commander Lorik carried behind her on a ceremonial platform. The ancient armor of the First Queen, fully restored, its crystal sections glowing with inner light, the metalwork catching and reflecting illumination like a star. The crowd gasped. Even the other alien species representatives seemed awed by the beauty of the restored artifact. Queen Vetara approached the platform and lifted the ancient armor carefully, holding it up for all to see. This armor was broken, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. For centuries it was treasured but considered beyond saving. We honored it as a relic of the past, beautiful but unable to serve its purpose. Today, it lives again. She gestured toward the workshop team assembled to one side. This was achieved not by Xanthari hands alone, nor by human hands alone, but by both working together. Each species brought unique knowledge. Each perspective revealed solutions the other could not see. Together, they created what neither could create apart. Queen Vetara set the armor down carefully and moved to the treaty table where Ambassador Grant waited. The two leaders signed the formal documents establishing peace and cooperation between their civilizations. The crowd applauded, but Jake barely heard it. He was watching the ancient armor, thinking about all the hours of work, all the problems solved, all the friendships formed in that workshop. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Queen Vetara found Jake standing near the display of the restored armor. She had changed out of her ceremonial pieces and looked tired but happy. You keep looking at the armor as if saying goodbye, she observed. I suppose I am, Jake admitted. It's been the focus of my life for weeks. Now it's done, and I'm not sure what comes next. Queen Vitara smiled, an expression Jake had learned to recognize on her crystalline features. What comes next is more work, Engineer Morrison. Did you think one restoration would satisfy you? There are thousands of artifacts on my homeworld that need skilled hands. Museums full of broken beauty waiting to be made whole. She reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Jake saw the small piece of crystal that had broken from her ceremonial armor that first day. The fragment he had carried in his pocket while making the repair. I want you to keep this, Queen Vetara said, placing it in his hand, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. You saw something broken and chose to fix it, even when it was forbidden, even when it was dangerous. That choice changed everything. It brought peace between our peoples. It proved that barriers between species are not as solid as they seem. Jake closed his fingers around the crystal fragment, feeling its smooth surface and sharp edges. I just couldn't stand to see something beautiful stay broken when I knew I could help. That is what makes you Kashtari, the Queen replied. The inability to ignore broken beauty. The compulsion to heal what others have given up on. This quality is rare in any species. Treasure it. She turned to leave, then paused. The transport to my homeworld departs in 6 weeks. I expect you to be on it. Bring your tools and your curiosity. We have much work to do together. As Queen Vetara walked away to rejoin the diplomatic celebrations, Jake stood alone with the crystal fragment, watching the light play through its facets. Around him, humans and Xanthari mingled freely now, sharing stories and making plans for future collaborations. The Cold War that had lasted 30 years was truly over, ended not by weapons or grand strategies, but by one engineer who couldn't walk past a broken thing without trying to fix it. Kelly and Danny found him a few minutes later. Kelly grinned and punched his shoulder lightly. So, Mr. Kashtari, does this mean you're too important to hang out with regular maintenance engineers now? It means I'm going to need help packing, Jake replied. 6 weeks isn't much time to get ready for an alien world. And I'm going to need people I trust working with me. The Queen mentioned apprenticeships. You two interested? Danny's eyes widened. You're asking if we want to go to the Xanthari homeworld and learn alien craftsmanship techniques that no other humans have ever studied. Is that a serious question? Dead serious, Jake said. This is bigger than me. This is about building something that lasts. Human and Xanthari working together, teaching each other, making both civilizations better. I can't do that alone. Kelly and Danny exchanged glances, then both nodded. We're in, Kelly said firmly. Someone has to make sure you don't accidentally insult an alien master craftsman by using the wrong resonance frequency. They stood together, 3 human engineers who had started as nobody special, now about to become ambassadors of a new age of cooperation. Above them, the restored ancient armor gleamed in its display, a symbol of what could be achieved when people looked past differences to see shared values. Jake slipped the crystal fragment into his pocket, where it settled with familiar weight. He would keep it with him always, a reminder of the night he chose to fix something broken and accidentally helped fix the broken relationship between 2 civilizations. Sometimes the smallest repairs led to the biggest changes. Sometimes one person with tools and courage could build a bridge where walls had stood before. The celebration continued around them, but Jake was already thinking ahead, to alien workshops waiting on a distant world, to techniques yet to be learned and taught, to broken things yet to be healed. The work was just beginning, and for the first time in his life, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, fixing broken things and making the galaxy a little more whole, one repair at a time,